Chapter 1. The Scent of Rain and Desperation. The diner smelled like stale coffee and regret. Grease clung to the air, a slick film coating everything. The cracked vinyl booths, my worn-out apron, my very soul. I slapped another burger onto the grill. Sizzle. Pop. It was a sound I heard in my sleep. 3 a.m, and the city outside was a monster breathing in the dark, its rainy breath fogging the windows. My feet didn't just ache. They screamed a silent, throbbing rhythm against the grimy linoleum. This was my second job of the day, a 16-hour marathon of smiles that didn't reach my eyes and a back that felt permanently bent into a question mark. Why? Because my brother Leo was fading. He was all I had left. A wisp of a boy with eyes too old for his 17 years, tangled up in hospital sheets that smelled of antiseptic and shattered hope. The doctors used words like experimental and prohibitive, words that were just fancy ways of saying expensive. So I worked. I ran. I poured coffee for truckers with lonely eyes and cleared plates for college kids who laughed too loud, their futures bright and easy. Mine was a tightrope walk over a canyon of debt, and the rope was starting to fray. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a frantic vibration against my thigh. The hospital. My heart did a sick little flip. I snatched it up, hiding behind the industrial-sized refrigerator. "This is Aria." "Miss Vale? It's Nurse Simmons." Her voice was gentle, which was always worse. "Leo had a difficult night. Dr. Evans wants to discuss adjusting his treatment plan." Adjusting. Another polite word for more expensive. A cold weight settled in my chest, heavy as stone. I leaned my forehead against the cool metal of the fridge, the hum vibrating through my bones. "I'll be there. After my class. If I can keep my eyes open through it. Business degree." The irony was a bitter pill I choked on daily. I was studying the art of making money while it bled from my fingers like sand. I needed more. Not just a little more. I needed a miracle. After my shift, the rain finally broke, washing the city grime down the gutters. I walked to my morning class, letting the cold drops soak my hair, my clothes. Maybe it could wash away the exhaustion, the fear. I ducked into a 24-hour print shop to fix my resume, the smell of fresh paper and hot toner a strange comfort. And that's when I saw it, pinned to a corkboard, a crisp, clean flyer standing out against a sea of faded roommate ads and lost cat posters. Blackthorn Enterprises. Personal assistant to the CEO. The name was a legend in the city, a monolith of glass and steel that scraped the clouds. The salary printed beneath it. It wasn't a number. It was a lifeline. It was Leo's next treatment. It was a breath of air after being held underwater for too long. My hands trembled as I took a picture of the ad. Blackthorn Enterprises. Run by a man they called the Wolf of the Financial District, Damian Blackthorn. A recluse. A ruthless prodigy who'd inherited an empire built on shadows and secrets. People said he was cold, untouchable, dangerous. I stared at the flyer, the rain dripping from my hair onto the floor. Dangerous didn't scare me anymore. Desperate was a whole different kind of monster. What did I have to lose? I already felt like a ghost haunting my own life. Maybe it was time to try haunting someone else's. Chapter 2. The Glass Tower. Blackthorn Enterprises wasn't just a building. It was a statement. A shard of obsidian stabbing into the gray sky, so tall it seemed to hold the clouds captive. Walking into the lobby felt like entering a different world. The air was cool and smelled of money. A clean, crisp scent mixed with something else. Something wild, like ozone after a lightning strike. Everything was chrome and black marble, reflecting a distorted version of me, a girl in a second-hand blazer that was a little too tight at the shoulders, her face pale with nerves. I felt like a stray cat that had wandered into a panther's territory. The first few interviews were a blur of polished smiles and sharp questions from women with sharper stilettos. They dissected my resume, my grades, my very existence. I kept my answers clipped, professional. My sarcasm was a shield, polished, bright, and ready. They asked why I wanted to work for a man with such a demanding reputation. "I'm not afraid of a challenge," I'd said, my voice steady, betraying none of the frantic hope clawing at my insides. Somehow, I made it to the final round. Me and 2 other candidates. A stern-looking woman with a severe haircut, Ms. Albright from HR, led us to a waiting area on the top floor. The whole world sprawled out below the floor-to-ceiling windows. It was a dizzying view, meant to remind you how small you were, how insignificant. The other candidates looked like they belonged here. Their confidence was a well-tailored suit. Mine felt like a costume. "Mr. Blackthorn will see you one by one," Ms. Albright announced, her voice leaving no room for argument. "Before you go in, you'll need to sign the final employment contract. It's a formality, of course, contingent on his final approval." She handed each of us a tablet with a document loaded onto it. The text was dense, full of legal jargon that made my head swim. I scrolled through pages of clauses about non-disclosure and corporate espionage, standard stuff. But then, near the end, there was a section that was different. The font was older, almost calligraphic, the binding of fealty. It was strange. It spoke of loyalty and service in terms that sounded medieval. It mentioned a pledge, an oath of service that was sealed upon the Alpha's acceptance. Alpha? Was that some kind of corporate slang, a weird motivational title? It had to be. This was a billion-dollar company, not some fantasy novel. It was probably just some ridiculous tradition the founder had started, too baked into the corporate DNA to remove. Outdated and harmless, Ms. Albright had called the contracts. This must be what she meant. The first candidate went in. 10 minutes later, she came out, her face ashen. The second followed. He emerged looking like he'd seen a ghost. My stomach twisted into a knot. What was in that office? Then, Ms. Albright called my name. Aria Vale. I stood up, my legs feeling like jelly. I tapped my signature on the tablet without a second thought. My focus wasn't on the weird, flowery words. It was on Leo, on the hospital bills, on the sheer, terrifying drop I'd face if I failed. I handed the tablet back to her. The signature box glowed a faint, almost imperceptible gold for a second before fading. Strange. He's ready for you, she said, gesturing toward 2 massive oak doors. I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders. It's just a man, just a job. But as my hand closed around the cold, heavy door handle, a tremor ran through me. An ancient, instinctual hum that vibrated deep in my bones. A warning. Or maybe a welcome. The feeling was so primal, so deeply unsettling, I almost turned and ran. Almost. Towards Chapter 3, The Contract and the Gaze. The office was a cage of glass and sky. 3 walls were windows, looking down on the city like a god from his mountain. The 4th was a dark, polished wood, lined with books that looked like they hadn't been touched in a century. The air, that strange, wild scent of ozone and pine, was stronger here. It was intoxicating. It made the hairs on my arms stand up, and behind a desk carved from a single piece of black wood sat Damian Blackthorn. He wasn't what I expected. The pictures in magazines didn't do him justice. They couldn't capture the sheer presence of him. He was a man carved from shadows and granite, dressed in a suit so black it seemed to drink the light. His stillness was absolute, predatory. He wasn't looking at papers or a screen. He was just watching the door, waiting for me. As I stepped inside, his eyes met mine, and the world tilted on its axis. They weren't just blue. They were the color of a winter storm, crackling with an energy that struck me like lightning. A jolt went through my body, hot and sharp. Every nerve ending fizzed. It felt like I'd touched a live wire. My breath hitched. For a second, I couldn't move, pinned by the force of his stare. There was a flicker in those icy depths, a flash of something raw and possessive that stole the air from my lungs. It was gone in an instant, replaced by a cold, unreadable mask. But I'd seen it. I'd felt it. "Miss Vale," he said. His voice was a low rumble, a deep baritone that vibrated through the floor, through the soles of my shoes, and straight into my bones. It didn't just command the room, it owned it. My instincts I didn't even know I had, screamed at me. Bow. Submit. The urge was so powerful, so primal it made my knees feel weak. I fought it. I locked my knees, lifted my chin, and met his gaze head-on. I would not cower. Not here. Not now. A flicker of surprise, or maybe approval, crossed his features. He gestured to the chair in front of his desk. "Sit." The word was a quiet command, but it wrapped around me like steel chains. I sat. My body obeyed before my brain even caught up. The interview was short, brutal. He didn't ask about my experience or my skills. He asked what I feared, what drove me. He peeled back my layers with a few quiet, cutting questions until I felt raw and exposed. He wasn't hiring an assistant. He was assessing a weakness, or a weapon. The whole time, I felt his gaze on me, a physical weight. It felt like he could see right through my skin, right into the deepest, most hidden parts of me. And the weirdest part? Some broken, forgotten piece of me liked it. It was terrifying. "You're hired," he said finally, the words abrupt. "Ms. Albright has your schedule. Don't be late." It wasn't a congratulations. It was a dismissal. Relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. I did it. I got the job. I got Leo his chance. I stood, my voice coming out stronger than I felt. "Thank you, Mr. Blackthorn." I turned and walked away, every step an effort of will. I could feel his eyes burning into my back. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. The moment the heavy doors clicked shut behind me, I sagged against the wall, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I felt shaken, haunted, marked. That ancient humming vibration was still thrumming under my skin, a forgotten song woken from a long, long sleep. What in the world had I just signed up for? The contract felt less like a document and more like a shackle, its invisible weight already settling around my soul. Chapter 4. The command weeks melted into a blur of spreadsheets, schedules, and the constant low-grade hum of anxiety that came with being in Damian Blackthorn's orbit. I learned the rhythms of his world, the sharp click of his Italian leather shoes on the marble floors, the way he never raised his voice, yet his quietest words could make a grown man tremble. I learned to anticipate his needs. Coffee, black, reports, concise, interruptions, none. The strange, electric pull I felt in his office on that first day had faded into a background thrum, a vibration I'd learned to ignore. I told myself it was just intimidation. The man was a walking storm cloud in a tailored suit. Who wouldn't be on edge? Today, the storm was raging. We were in the main boardroom, a sterile chamber of glass and steel overlooking the city. A dozen executives sat around a table that seemed a mile long, their faces tight as Damian tore apart their quarterly projections. His voice was a blade slicing through their excuses with cold, precise cuts. I stood by the wall, a silent ghost, ready to take notes or fetch documents. "And your solution is to downsize the Jackson project?" Damian's gaze was fixed on a portly man named Henderson, who was sweating through his collar. "That's not a solution. That's a surrender." "But Mr. Blackthorn, the numbers—" Henderson stammered. "The numbers are a symptom, not the disease." Damian stood, pacing before the vast window. He was energy-contained, a panther in a cage of his own making. "I need a new approach. Aria, fetch me the initial schematics for the Orion merger, the ones from my private drive." "Yes, sir." I turned to leave, my shoes silent on the plush carpet. It was a relief to escape the suffocating tension. I was halfway to the door when Damian's attention snapped back to Henderson, his voice sharp with irritation. "And you! Don't bring me problems you haven't already bled for. Stay." The word wasn't for me. It was for Henderson. A casual throwaway command in the heat of his frustration. But it hit me like a physical blow. My body froze. One foot was half raised, ready for the next step. It stayed there. My muscles locked, turning to stone from my ankles to my neck. I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. Panic, cold, sharp, and absolute, flashed through me. My mind screamed, "Move," but my limbs were no longer mine. They belonged to his voice, to that single, careless word. It was like being a puppet whose strings had been pulled taut. My breath caught in my throat, a strangled little gasp. The sound, small as it was, cut through the room's tension. The argument stopped. Silence descended. I could feel every eye in the room on me, a dozen pairs of confused stares. Through the roaring in my ears, I saw Damian's head turn. His stormy eyes found mine. For a split second, his expression was blank, confused. Then, comprehension dawned. His eyes widened, the cold mask cracking to reveal a flash of pure, undiluted shock. He saw my terror. He saw my rigid, unnatural posture. He understood. Oh God, he understood what had just happened. The air crackled. He took a half step toward me, his face a storm of emotions I couldn't decipher. Shock, fury, and something else. Something that looked terrifyingly like fear. He masked it in an instant. His voice, when it came, was dangerously soft. "Aria, you can go." The spell shattered. Power flooded back into my limbs so fast I stumbled, catching myself on the doorframe. My lungs burned as I finally sucked in a breath. I didn't look back. I fled. Down the hall, into the empty sanctuary of my small office, where I slammed the door and leaned against it, my body shaking with violent, uncontrollable tremors. The contract. That weird, ancient clause. It wasn't a tradition. It wasn't harmless. It was real. And it had me in its chains. Chapter 5. The Unseen Chains. The heavy oak door to my office swung open without a knock. Damian filled the doorway, his sheer size and presence sucking all the air from the tiny room. He shut it behind him, the click of the latch echoing like a jail cell locking. His face was grim, carved from stone, but I could see the frantic energy simmering in his eyes. The storm was no longer contained. "Are you all right?" The question was clipped, harsh, not gentle. I pushed myself away from the door, wrapping my arms around myself. My voice was a broken whisper. "What was that?" He didn't pretend to misunderstand. He stalked toward his desk, running a hand through his dark hair, the first crack in his perfect, controlled facade I had ever witnessed. "It's the contract, an old clause, a binding ritual." "A ritual?" I laughed, but the sound was thin and hysterical. "What are you talking about? This is a company, not a cult. You can't just own people." "I don't own you," he snarled, turning to face me. The predatory intensity was back, 100 times stronger. "It's a loyalty oath. It was meant to be symbolic, ancient, something my ancestors put in place to ensure fidelity among their inner circle. It's not supposed to be active." "Well, it felt pretty damn active to me," I shot back, my terror finally giving way to a surge of white-hot fury. "I couldn't move, Damian. You said one word and I was a statue, a puppet. That's not a symbol, that's a cage." "I know," he bit out, his jaw tight. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something other than a ruthless CEO. I saw a man completely out of his depth. It's tied to the alpha, the leader of the pack. The word from the contract. Alpha. My blood ran cold. This wasn't corporate slang. He meant it, literally. The stories, the rumors about him being a wolf on Wall Street. They were more real than I could ever have imagined. The wild scent of him, the predatory stillness, the command in his voice. It all clicked into place, a terrifying mosaic of impossibility. "The pack," I breathed, shaking my head in denial. You're not. It doesn't matter what I am." He cut in, his voice dangerously low. What matters is that the binding was triggered. It has woven itself into your life force, into your very soul. He took a step closer, his stormy eyes locking onto mine. The air between us grew thick, heavy with unspoken things. And I don't know why. I flinched back. Then undo it. Tear up the contract. Fire me. I don't care. Just get this thing out of me. His expression darkened. A deep, sorrowful shadow passed through his eyes, so profound it momentarily silenced my rage. I can't. What do you mean you can't? I demanded. Because it's too late, he said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper that chilled me to the bone. The ritual is complete, the bond is sealed, forcibly breaking a bond like this now. He paused, and the weight of his gaze was suffocating. It wouldn't just sever a contract, Aria. It would shatter you. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. Shatter me. The words echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of the room. I wasn't just trapped in a job. I wasn't just bound by a magical contract. My very life was now tied to this man, to this impossible, terrifying world I had stumbled into. I looked at Damian Blackthorn, the alpha, my boss, and I saw the bars of my cage. He hadn't just hired an assistant. He had shackled a soul. Chapter 6. A Gilded Cage. The days that followed were a special kind of hell. A quiet, tense nightmare played out in the silent corridors and glass-walled offices of the top floor. Nothing had changed, yet everything was different. Damian ordered me not to speak of what happened to anyone, and I had no choice but to obey. The command was unspoken now, but it was always there, a humming, invisible leash around my neck. We were co-conspirators in a secret that was suffocating me. He watched me, constantly. When I brought him coffee, his eyes would follow my hands. When I took notes in a meeting, I could feel his gaze on the back of my neck, a heavy, possessive weight. It wasn't lecherous. It was territorial. Like he was guarding a volatile secret, and I was the bomb that could explode at any moment. The air between us was a minefield of unspoken words and simmering tension. Proximity to him was a strange torture. A low, warm current flowed through my veins when he was near, a confusing hum of energy that made my skin tingle. When he left for a business trip for 2 days, a deep, aching chill settled into my bones that no sweater could warm. My body was betraying me, forging a connection I didn't want, to a man who was my captor. I tried to rebel in small ways. I wore a scent he didn't like. I made his coffee too bitter. I challenged his opinions in front of his board, using my business knowledge as a weapon. Each act of defiance earned me a dark, stormy look that was equal parts fury and something else. Something that looked dangerously like amusement. It was maddening. He was a puzzle I couldn't solve, and I was a prisoner he refused to release. My own body was becoming a stranger. One evening, I was working late, staring at my reflection in the darkened office window. The city lights glittered behind my ghostly image like 1,000 unsympathetic eyes. Frustration boiled inside me, a hot, helpless rage at my situation, at Damian, at my own powerlessness. My hands clenched into fists at my side. It's not fair. As the thought ripped through me, the heavy glass of water on my desk rattled. A tiny ripple disturbed the surface of the water, then another. I stared at it, my heart starting to pound. It was probably just a vibration from the building's air conditioning. It had to be. I looked back at my reflection, my eyes wide, and for a split second, a single, impossible heartbeat. My brown eyes flashed. Not a trick of the light, not a reflection of a passing car. They flashed with an inner luminescence, a brilliant burning gold. I gasped, stumbling back from the window. I blinked, and they were normal again. Just my own tired brown eyes staring back at me, wide with a new kind of fear. What was happening to me? Was I going crazy? Was this some side effect of the magical binding? The questions piled up, each one a new bar on my cage. The contract hadn't just trapped me with him. It had woken something up inside of me, something I didn't understand. I was locked in a new reality, a gilded cage where the rules made no sense and my own body was becoming an enemy. The point of no return had passed the moment I signed my name. Now, I wasn't just fighting for my freedom from Damian Blackthorn. I was fighting for my sanity, terrified of the stranger I saw staring back at me from my own reflection. Chapter 7. The awakening life became a balancing act on a razor's edge. I moved through my days at Blackthorn Enterprises like a ghost, my professional smile a perfect mask for the chaos spiraling inside me. I was efficient. I was invisible. But my body had other plans. It was staging a quiet, terrifying rebellion. Little things at first. A stack of files teetered, about to crash to the floor, and I shot my hand out to catch it. For a split second, my fingernails felt harder, thicker, sharp enough to scratch the polished wood of the credenza. I snatched my hand back, staring at my perfectly normal short nails. I must have imagined it. Then, in a meeting, a smug executive named Peterson tried to throw me under the bus for a scheduling error that was his own fault. Perhaps if Miss Vale were more attentive, he'd sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. A hot, ugly rage flared in my chest. It was so intense it felt like a furnace igniting behind my ribs. I opened my mouth to fire back a sarcastic reply, but I caught my reflection in the chrome base of a lamp. My eyes, they were glowing, a soft, molten gold, pulsing with a light of their own. I snapped my mouth shut, my heart hammering. I quickly looked down, praying no one had noticed. The light faded. It was happening more and more. These impossible, terrifying glitches in my reality. The nights were worse. Sleep offered no escape. It dragged me into a world of shadow and pine, a forest that existed only in my mind. Every night I dreamed of him, a massive black wolf. He was enormous, a creature of myth, with fur like spun midnight and eyes the color of a winter storm. Damian's eyes. In the dreams, he never hurt me. He just watched. He would stalk the edges of a clearing where I stood, his presence a heavy, possessive blanket. I could smell the storm on his fur, feel the low rumble of his growl in my own chest. Sometimes, he would nudge my hand with his cold, wet nose, and a jolt of pure lightning would shoot up my arm. I'd wake up tangled in my sheets, my body slick with sweat, a strange, hollow ache in my core. The dreams felt more real than my waking life, and they left me with a desperate, confusing longing for something I couldn't name. One morning, after a particularly vivid dream, I was a wreck. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my coffee cup. I was heading to the executive lounge to grab a file when I heard voices from inside. Damian's and Peterson's. Absolutely unacceptable, Peterson was saying, his voice loud and indignant. She's insubordinate. She questioned my authority in front of the entire board. I froze, my hand on the door. Damian's reply was dangerously quiet, a low, silky threat. Are you questioning my choice in staff, Peterson? Of course not, sir, but she answers to me, not you. Her attentiveness, as you so eloquently put it, is my concern. And I assure you, she has my full attention. The unspoken warning in his voice was so sharp it could cut glass. Now, if you ever belittle my assistant in public again, you will find your own position here is no longer required. Am I clear? A choked silence followed. Then a mumbled, "Yes, Mr. Blackthorn." I backed away from the door, my heart pounding. He had defended me, but it didn't feel like a boss protecting his employee. It felt like a wolf marking his territory. The invisible leash around my neck tightened, and I felt the terrifying, thrilling pull of it. Chapter 8. The Pain of Distance. I needed to feel normal, even for just one night. I needed to prove to myself that I was still Aria Vale, a regular 23-year-old girl, not some creature in a cage, dreaming of wolves. There was a guy in my night class, Alex. He was sweet, with a boyish grin and kind eyes. He'd asked me out for coffee a dozen times. I'd always said no. Too busy, too tired, too broken. But now, rebellion was a fire in my blood. I needed to prove Damian's hold on me wasn't absolute. So I said yes. Putting on a simple dress felt like an act of war. Every swipe of mascara, every spritz of perfume was me shouting into the void, I am my own. The entire time I was getting ready, a low, persistent ache throbbed behind my eyes, a dull chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. I ignored it. I had to. The date started nice. We went to a small Italian restaurant downtown, a place filled with the warm smells of garlic and basil, the cheerful clatter of plates and conversation. Alex was easy to talk to. He complained about our finance professor and told me a funny story about his dog. I found myself smiling, a real, genuine smile. For an hour, I felt like me again. The weight in my chest seemed to lift. The invisible chains loosened. Maybe I could beat this. Then he reached across the table and took my hand. I'm really glad you finally said yes, Aria, he said, his thumb tracing a slow circle over my knuckles. His touch was gentle, warm, and it felt like being branded with a hot iron. A sharp, searing pain shot up my arm. It wasn't just physical, it was a deep, cellular rejection, a violent no that echoed through my entire being. I gasped, snatching my hand back as if I'd been burned. Alex's smile fell. Whoa, are you okay? Did I? No, it's not you, I said, trying to force a laugh. It came out as a strangled croak. Static shock. It's this sweater. I rubbed my hand under the table, but the burning lingered, a phantom heat that made my skin crawl. The ache behind my eyes sharpened into a pounding headache. The chill I'd been ignoring seeped deeper into my bones, making my teeth chatter. The rest of the date was a disaster. I couldn't focus. I could barely follow the conversation. My body was screaming at me. Every minute I was away from the Blackthorn building, away from him, the symptoms got worse. The bone-deep chill, the feverish heat behind my skin, the relentless throb in my head. It was the bond. A leash that not only held me, but poisoned me when I pulled too far away. Alex walked me to my apartment door, his kind face etched with concern. Are you sure you're okay? You look really pale. I'm fine. Just a long week, I lied. He hesitated, then leaned in, his intention clear. He was going to kiss me. Panic seized me. If his touch on my hand felt like fire, what would a kiss feel like? I turned my head at the last second, and his lips brushed my cheek. Even that small contact sent another wave of revulsion and pain through me. It felt wrong, a betrayal. My body, my very soul, was rejecting him because it already belonged to someone else. I mumbled a hasty goodbye and practically fell into my apartment, locking the door behind me. I sank to the floor, wrapping my arms around my shivering body. The date hadn't been an act of freedom. It had only shown me the true nature of my prison. There was no escape. The bond didn't just want my loyalty, it wanted all of me. Chapter 9. The Scent of Arrival. I had to go back. I'd left the Orion merger files, the very ones Damian had asked for earlier in the week, on my desk. Using it as an excuse, I fled my apartment. Fled the ghost of Alex's touch on my cheek. The moment my taxi pulled up to the gleaming obsidian tower, the aching chill in my bones began to subside. The headache lessened. My body craved proximity to him, and the realization made me feel sick with helplessness. The top floor was silent and dark, lit only by the emergency lights and the glittering diamond blanket of the city below. My office was just as I'd left it. I grabbed the files, my hands still trembling slightly. I should have just gone straight back to the elevators. I shouldn't have looked. But I saw a light on under his door, a single, golden line in the darkness. He was still here. My heart started to pound, a heavy, nervous rhythm. I should leave. I really should just leave. But my feet moved on their own, carrying me toward his office. I pushed the door open a crack. He was standing by the window, his back to me, staring down at the city he owned. He hadn't heard me. I could slip away. "Where were you?" His voice was a low growl in the silent room. He didn't turn around, but I knew he was talking to me. I forgot these," I said, my voice barely a whisper, holding up the files like a shield. He finally turned. His face was all sharp angles and shadows, but his eyes were black pools of something I had never seen before, a raw, primal fury that made the air crackle. He took a slow, deliberate step toward me, then another. He moved with a terrifying grace, a predator closing in on its prey. "That's not what I asked," he murmured, his voice a silken threat. He stopped right in front of me, so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. My back was pressed against the door. There was nowhere to run. He leaned in, not touching me, but inhaling deeply, his nose just inches from my neck. A shudder racked my body. "You went out." It wasn't a question. With him? My blood ran cold. How could he possibly know? "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me, Aria." His voice dropped even lower, vibrating through my chest. "I can smell him on you, the cloying, sweet scent of some human cologne. It's all over your skin, your hair." His eyes flashed, a brief, terrifying blaze of molten gold in the dim light. His control was gone. This wasn't my boss anymore. This was the alpha, the wolf. "Who was he?" "It's none of your business," I choked out, my defiance a flimsy shield against the storm in his eyes. A low growl ripped from his chest, an inhuman sound that vibrated against my own ribs. He braced a hand on the door next to my head, caging me in. His other hand came up, his fingers gently tracing the line of my jaw, sending sparks of fire and ice through my veins. His touch wasn't painful like Alex's had been. It felt like coming home, like a missing piece of my soul clicking into place. And that terrified me more than anything. "Everything about you," he growled, his gaze dropping to my lips, "is my business." He leaned closer, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought he was going to kiss me. The air was thick with a tension so powerful it was a living thing. I saw the war in his eyes, the man fighting the beast. The beast was winning. His control snapped. But at the last second, with a guttural snarl of frustration directed at himself, he pulled back. He slammed his fist into the door next to my head, the wood groaning in protest. The sound echoed in the silent office like a gunshot. He was breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling, his eyes blazing. He was on the edge, and I had pushed him there. He stared at me for one more long, searing moment, his expression a chaotic mix of rage, possession, and something that looked terrifyingly like pain. Then he turned and stalked away, leaving me trembling against the door, my heart shattered into a million frantic pieces. Chapter 10. The enemy appears. The air in the office remained thick for days, a heavy blanket of unspoken words. Damian was a storm cloud of controlled fury, his movements precise, his voice clipped. I was a bundle of raw nerves, flinching every time he came near. The memory of his raw power, of his fist hitting the door next to my head, was seared into my mind. He was a beast in a suit, and I had seen its teeth. We orbited each other in a tense, silent dance, the bond between us a humming wire of resentment and a terrifying magnetic pull. And then Cale Blackthorn walked in. He didn't have an appointment. He just appeared, striding past the terrified receptionist like he owned the place. If Damian was a creature of shadow and granite, Kyle was a creature of fire and smoke. He was handsome, with the same sharp Blackthorn features as his half-brother, but where Damian's were severe, Kyle's were softened by a lazy, charming smile. His eyes, a startling shade of amber, missed nothing. He moved with a fluid, easy grace that was somehow more threatening than Damian's rigid control. "Brother," Cale said, his voice a smooth, rich baritone. He spread his arms wide, the picture of warmth. So formal. You couldn't return my calls? Damian didn't move from behind his desk. He just watched Kale, his face an unreadable mask of ice. I've been busy. Kale's charming smile didn't falter, but his amber eyes slid over to me and the warmth vanished. His gaze was sharp and probing, like a physical touch. It stripped me bare. I see that. You've acquired a new asset. He walked toward my desk, his scent, spicy and wild like cinnamon and scorched earth, making my nose wrinkle. And who might you be? Aria Vale, Mr. Blackthorn's personal assistant, I said, my voice colder than I intended. Aria, he purred, tasting the name. He leaned against my desk, invading my space. A lovely name for a lovely human girl. He stressed the word human, his eyes glinting with a secret knowledge that made my blood run cold. Tell me, Aria, how do you enjoy working for my brother? He doesn't work his pretty little assistants too hard, does he? The condescension was a slap in the face. Before I could respond, Damian's voice cut through the air, sharp as a razor. That's enough, Kyle. I'm just making conversation, Kyle said, turning back to Damian, though his eyes lingered on me. Trying to be friendly. Something you know nothing about. He pushed off the desk and began to prowl around the office, his movements sinuous. I heard the council is getting restless. They say you're still without a Luna. An alpha without his mate is unstable. It makes the pack nervous. My pack is loyal, Damian stated, his voice flat. For now, Kale countered, his smile turning sharp. But loyalty can be fickle, especially when a more suitable alpha presents himself. The threat was clear, hanging in the air between them. The two brothers were locked in a silent war, and I had just become a pawn on their chessboard. Kale's gaze flicked back to me one last time, a predatory gleam in his amber eyes that promised trouble. It was a pleasure to meet you, Aria Vale. I have a feeling we'll be seeing much more of each other. He strolled out of the office, leaving a trail of suffocating tension in his wake. I stared at the empty doorway, a cold knot of dread tightening in my stomach. Damian stood behind his desk, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, we weren't captor and captive. We were something else. We were allies against a common, smiling enemy. Chapter 11. The Storm and the Kiss. The sky broke that afternoon. The city, which had been simmering under a gray, oppressive lid of humidity, was finally unleashed. Rain came down in blinding sheets, and thunder cracked the sky open, the sound rattling the massive windows of the tower. It was a storm that matched the one raging inside my own chest. Kale's visit had left me deeply unsettled, and the tension with Damian had only grown, coiling tighter and tighter until it felt like the air itself was about to snap. Just before 5, the lights flickered. Once, twice. Then, with a low groan, the entire floor plunged into darkness. The hum of the computers, the air conditioning, the very lifeblood of the building, all gone. The only light was the frantic strobing flash of lightning outside, which threw the office into stark, monstrous silhouettes. The only sound was the howling wind and the drumming of the rain. My heart leaped into my throat. I was trapped. Trapped on the top floor of a skyscraper in a blackout. With him. Stay put. Damian's voice came from the darkness, a low rumble that was somehow comforting and terrifying all at once. I heard him moving, a dark shape against the strobing window. A minute later, a small flame flickered to life. He'd found a candle on a side table, its soft golden glow pushing back the shadows just enough to see. His face was a mask of flickering light and deep darkness, his eyes seeming to burn with a light of their own. We were alone. Truly alone. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the storm. All the pretenses, all the roles of boss and assistant were stripped away. We were just a man and a woman, trapped in a glass cage at the top of the world. The air was electric, charged with more than just the storm. It was charged with months of unspoken words, of forbidden longing, of primal, undeniable chemistry. He moved toward me, his steps slow and deliberate. I was frozen, my back pressed against the cold glass of the window, the thunder vibrating through me. He stopped in front of me, the candlelight casting a warm glow on his face. He looked haunted. The control was gone from his eyes, replaced by a raw, desperate hunger that I felt mirrored in my own soul. He raised a hand, his fingers hesitating for a moment before they brushed a stray strand of hair from my cheek. His touch was electric. A gasp escaped my lips. It wasn't the burn of rejection I'd felt with Alex. This was a jolt of recognition, a current of pure energy that sang through my veins. Aria, he whispered my name, and the sound was a prayer and a curse all at once. And then his control shattered. He didn't lean in slowly. He crashed into me. His mouth claimed mine in a kiss that was not gentle or tender. It was a storm. It was lightning and thunder and the breaking of a dam. It was raw, hungry, and desperate. A clash of wills and a surrender to fate. His lips were hard and demanding, and I met his ferocity with my own. My hands coming up to tangle in his hair, pulling him closer. All the fear, the anger, the confusion, it all melted away into this one. Searing, undeniable truth. I wanted this. I wanted him. The kiss was an explosion, a raw confession that neither of us could speak aloud. It tasted of the storm, of ozone, of secrets, and of a desperate, soul-deep loneliness I recognized as my own. For a timeless moment, there was nothing but the storm inside and out. Then, reality came crashing back. What was I doing? This was my captor, the man who held my life in his hands. With a choked sob, I tore my mouth from his, shoving against his chest. No, I gasped. The word ripped from my throat. I was furious at him, but I was 1,000 times more furious with myself, with my body's traitorous, absolute surrender. Don't ever do that again. He stared down at me, his chest heaving, his stormy eyes blazing in the candlelight, and we both knew. It was a lie. Chapter 12. The Revelation I Ran. I fled the office, fled the tower, fled the ghost of his kiss on my lips. I ran through the storm-drenched streets, not even noticing the cold rain soaking me to the bone. The kiss hadn't solved anything. It had broken everything. It shattered my defenses, turning my simple black-and-white rage into a chaotic swirl of gray. I hated him for trapping me, and I wanted him with a desperation that terrified me. The conflict was ripping me apart. I needed answers, not his answers, clouded by his secrets and his power over me. I needed my own. What was I? Why did the contract affect me this way? Why did my eyes glow gold and my body reject another man's touch? My parents. It had to go back to them. The exiles. The rule breakers. There was a storage unit on the outskirts of the city, a place I hadn't visited in years. It held the few pathetic boxes of their belongings that I'd managed to keep after they were gone. I drove there, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The smell of dust and old memories hit me as I rolled up the metal door. Inside, under a dusty tarp, was a large wooden chest. My mother's hope chest. I spent an hour digging through it, finding nothing but faded linens and old photographs of people I didn't know. I was about to give up, the familiar sting of disappointment welling in my throat, when my fingers brushed against a loose board at the bottom. A false bottom. My heart started to hammer. I pried it open with trembling hands. Beneath it, nestled in faded velvet, was a small, leather-bound journal. My mother's. Her handwriting was a delicate looping script. I sat on the cold concrete floor and began to read. The story that unfolded wasn't the one I'd been told. My parents hadn't been banished for breaking some minor pack law. They had been leaders. They were part of a rebellion, a movement of shifters who believed the rigid, pure-blood laws of the Alpha Council were corrupt and outdated. They fought for a world where shifters could choose their own mates, regardless of bloodline. And then I saw the word hybrid. My mother wrote about the fear and prejudice they faced, about shifters with mixed bloodlines, part wolf, part something else, who were hunted down, exiled, or killed. Hybrids were feared because their powers were unpredictable, and they threatened the purity of the ancestral wolf lines. They were a challenge to the alpha's absolute power. My father. He wasn't just a wolf, he was a rare hybrid, his existence a threat to the entire council. My breath caught. I turned the page and the words swam before my eyes. A date, my birthday. Our daughter was born today, my mother wrote. Aria, she is perfect, but she carries his blood. The council knows about her. They see her not as a child, but as a weapon or an abomination. We cannot protect her. So we have done the unthinkable, an old magic, a dangerous ritual to save her life. We have bound her wolf, suppressed her hybrid nature deep within her soul. She will appear human. She will feel human. She will be safe from those who would hunt her. But the binding is tied to her life force. It can only be undone by the call of her true mate, an alpha of immense power whose soul is destined to recognize hers, even through the veil. The journal slipped from my fingers, landing with a soft thud on the concrete. It wasn't just the contract. It was me. It had always been me. I wasn't a human trapped by a wolf's magic. I was a wolf, a hybrid, who had been trapped in a human shell. Damian's bond, the alpha's call, it hadn't enslaved me. It had started to set me free. I staggered to my feet and looked at my reflection in a dusty, cracked mirror leaning against the wall. I saw the same face, the same brown eyes. But I was looking at a stranger with a dormant, mythical power sleeping in her veins. My fight wasn't for freedom anymore. It was for my very identity. Chapter 13. The alpha's chair knowledge was power. The words in my mother's journal hadn't just given me answers. They had forged a weapon inside my soul. I was no longer a human girl caught in a supernatural storm. I was the storm. Walking into Blackthorn Enterprises the next day, the world looked different. The air hummed with a new energy. I could feel the subtle currents of power in the building, the thrum of the city, the deep, resonant presence of Damian in his office. A beacon I was now acutely, undeniably aware of. My fear was gone, replaced by a sharp, glittering curiosity. I was a new creature testing the edges of my cage, only to find the bars were part of me. This new confidence was a current under my skin. In the afternoon board meeting, I didn't just stand silently by the wall. When one of Damian's executives presented a flawed acquisition strategy, I stepped forward. "The projections are wrong," I said, my voice clear and steady. Every head in the room turned to me. "You haven't accounted for the volatility in the overseas supply chain. Your risk assessment is a fantasy." The executive sputtered, but Damian silenced him with a look. He stared at me, his stormy eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with a new, searching intensity. He saw the change in me. "Explain," he commanded. And I did. I laid out the flaws, citing market data and geopolitical factors, my business degree finally feeling like more than a piece of paper. I was challenging his top people. I was challenging him. The room was silent when I finished. Damian's expression was unreadable, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Respect. And a hint of something wilder. Something that recognized the shift in me on a primal level. That night, we worked late. The silence between us no longer just tense, but filled with a new, simmering awareness. He was at his desk, and I was supposed to be finishing a report. But I found my feet carrying me across the plush carpet toward him, toward the massive, throne-like chair he sat in. It was more than a piece of furniture. It was his seat of power, carved from a single piece of dark, ancient wood that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. When he looked up, I gave him a small, challenging smile. "Tired of sitting on your throne, Your Majesty?" I teased, my voice light. "It's just a chair, Aria." "No, it's not," I said softly, walking around behind him. I rested my hands on the high back, feeling a strange energy thrumming from the wood into my palms. It felt like home. On a wild impulse, I said, "Get up." He raised an eyebrow, a mix of disbelief and amusement on his face. But he stood, his gaze never leaving mine. I slid into the still warm seat. It enveloped me. Power, ancient and vast, seemed to seep into my bones from the chair. I felt dominant, strong. I leaned back, propping my feet up on his massive desk, and gave him a lazy, triumphant smirk. "It's a good view from here." The amusement vanished from his face, replaced by that raw, hungry look that made my breath catch. In 2 long strides, he was at the desk, slamming his hands down on either side of me, trapping me in the chair. He leaned over me, his scent of pine and storm filling my senses. "You're playing a very dangerous game," he growled, his voice a low vibration that shook my soul. "I'm just getting started," I whispered back. That was all it took. His mouth crashed down on mine, a desperate, consuming kiss that was 1,000 times more intense than the first. This wasn't a moment of lost control. This was a claiming, a collision of 2 forces that could no longer be denied. I met him with equal fire, my hands coming up to cup his face, my fingers digging into his skin. He groaned, a deep, guttural sound, and deepened the kiss, his body pressing me back into the powerful embrace of the alpha's chair. His lips left mine, trailing a path of fire down my jaw to the sensitive skin of my neck. I arched into him, my head falling back. I felt the sharp points of his canines graze my pulse point. A silent plea, a desperate question. Mark me. The beast in him wanted to claim what was his. But then, he pulled back. He rested his forehead against mine, his breathing ragged, his body trembling with the force of his restraint. His stormy eyes bored into mine, filled with a tormented, beautiful sincerity. "Not like this," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Not because of a bond or a contract or because I'm your alpha." He brushed his thumb over my lips, his touch surprisingly gentle. "Not until you choose me." Chapter 14. The Scandal. His words echoed in my heart for days. Not until you choose me. He had given me back the one thing I thought I'd lost forever. A choice. The knowledge shifted the very foundation of our relationship. The invisible leash was still there, but it no longer felt like a chain. It felt like a connection, its purpose and meaning waiting for my decision. This fragile truce, this simmering new beginning, was a secret world we had built for ourselves on the top floor of his tower. But the real world was about to come crashing in. It happened on a Tuesday. I was organizing his schedule when his private line, the one reserved for high-level pack business, buzzed. He answered, his voice calm and authoritative. "Blackthorn." I watched as the color drained from his face. The controlled mask of the CEO crumbled, revealing the grim, cornered alpha beneath. His knuckles were white where he gripped the phone. His entire body went rigid, a statue of coiled fury. "On what grounds?" he demanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He listened for a moment, his eyes closing briefly in what looked like pained resignation. "I'll be there." He hung up the phone with a sharp, final click. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. "What is it?" I asked, my voice small. He turned to look at me, and the expression in his eyes made my stomach clench. It was a protective, furious look, the look of a wolf shielding its den from hunters. "The council," he said, his voice flat and hard as steel. "They've called a formal hearing." "A hearing for what?" "For me," he bit out. "For breaking pack law." His stormy gaze met mine, and I saw the truth of the disaster that was about to unfold. "Someone leaked the contract, Aria. Your contract." My blood ran cold. Kale. It had to be him. His smiling, predatory face flashed in my mind. He had found the perfect weapon to use against his brother. Me. "They're painting a picture," Damian continued, his voice a low, controlled rage. That I found a human, a helpless outsider, and used an ancient, forbidden binding to enslave her to my will. He laughed, a short, harsh sound devoid of any humor. They're accusing me of being a tyrant, of using dark magic to manipulate and control. The penalty for such a thing is forfeiture of my title. They could strip me of my alpha status, exile me. Everything he had, his power, his pack, his entire world, it was all at risk because of me. Guilt, sharp and bitter, rose in my throat. I'll tell them the truth, I said immediately, standing up. I'll tell them it wasn't like that. No, he commanded, his voice absolute. You will stay here. This is pack business. You are not to get involved. It's too dangerous for you. He was trying to protect me, trying to shield me from the wolves, but I wasn't the same fragile girl he'd hired. I walked over to him, stopping until we were inches apart. I looked up into his stormy, worried eyes. Your pack is accusing you because of me. Your rival is using me as a weapon. This stopped being just your business the moment you looked at me in that boardroom and told me to stay. I reached out, my hand resting on his arm. I felt the rigid muscles beneath his suit. I'm not hiding, Damian. I'm not your weakness. Let me be your strength. We face them together. He stared down at me, a war raging in his eyes. The instinct to protect me was fighting with the undeniable truth of my words. Finally, he gave a slow, reluctant nod. A fragile, unspoken pact was sealed between us. We were a united front. But as we prepared to face the council, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into a storm we couldn't possibly survive. Chapter 15. The Brothers' Betrayal. Before we could leave for the council hearing, my phone rang. It was the hospital. Dr. Evans. My heart instantly seized with a familiar dread. Aria, it's incredible news, the doctor said, his voice filled with a genuine excitement I hadn't heard from him in years. An anonymous benefactor has stepped forward. They've fully funded Leo's inclusion in a new experimental gene therapy trial in Switzerland. It's the best shot he has, Aria, a real chance at a cure. Tears of pure, unadulterated joy sprang to my eyes. A cure. The word was a miracle. Oh my God, are you serious? They're flying him out tonight. I thought you'd want to come say goodbye before he's transferred. Yes, of course, I'm on my way, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I hung up and turned to Damian, my face beaming. It's Leo. Someone is paying for a cure. Damian's expression wasn't joyful. A dark, suspicious shadow crossed his face. Aria. Who? I don't know. It's anonymous. It's a miracle, I said, grabbing my purse. I have to go. I have to see him. Wait, Damian said, his voice tight with a warning I didn't want to hear. This is too convenient. The timing. Don't, I said, shaking my head, refusing to let him ruin this. Don't you dare spoil this. This is the best news of my entire life. I ran from the office, leaving him standing there, his face a grim mask of foreboding. I practically flew to the hospital, my heart soaring. I burst into Leo's room, a wide, happy grin on my face. Leo, did you hear? My smile froze and died on my lips. Leo was sitting up in bed, looking pale and scared. And in the chair next to his bed, looking perfectly at home, was Cale Blackthorn. He gave me his lazy, charming smile, but his amber eyes were cold as ice. Aria, he said smoothly. Wonderful news about your brother, isn't it? I'm so glad I could help. The world stopped. The doctor's words echoed in my head. An anonymous benefactor. The timing. Damian's warning. It all crashed down on me with the force of a physical blow. No, it couldn't be. You? I whispered, my voice trembling. Me, Cale confirmed, standing up. He strolled over to me, his presence suffocating. Gene therapy is incredibly expensive, but a boy's life. You can't put a price on that, can you? I looked at my brother, at the shame and terror in his eyes. I saw the IV in his arm, pumping the first dose of the life-saving medicine into his veins. Medicine that had been paid for with my soul. "Leo?" I asked, my voice breaking. "What did you do?" Leo wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared down at his thin hands, his guilt a tangible thing in the sterile room. "Don't be too hard on him," Kyle purred, his voice a venomous caress in my ear. "He just answered a few questions for me. About your new job, your schedule, your relationship with my dear brother." He had used my sick, desperate brother. He had twisted my deepest love, my entire reason for being, into a weapon. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it hollowed me out, leaving nothing but a cold, aching void. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice dead. "Simple," Kyle said, his smile turning sharp and predatory. "The council hearing is tonight. You will not be there. You will leave Damian. You will come with me, and in return, your brother gets to live." He gestured to the IV bag. "But if you refuse, if you side with him, well, the funding for this little miracle dries up immediately. The choice is yours, Aria." He left me there, standing in the silent, sterile room, the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor counting down the seconds of my impossible choice. My brother's life or my own soul. Cale hadn't just put Damian's throne at risk. He had taken my heart and my hope, and he had crushed them in his fist. Chapter 16. The False Choice. I walked back into Damian's office like a ghost. My feet moved, my lungs drew breath, but the part of me that felt things, the part that had soared with joy for Leo and burned with desire for Damian, was dead. It had died in that sterile hospital room under the cold, triumphant gaze of Cale Blackthorn. All that was left was a hollow, aching void and a single, grim purpose. Save Leo, no matter the cost. Damian was waiting for me, his face a mask of taut anxiety. He saw my expression, and the hope in his eyes flickered and died. "Aria, what is it? What's wrong?" I couldn't meet his gaze. I looked at the corner of his vast, empty desk, focusing on the sharp, clean lines. If I looked at him, I would break. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice a dead, flat thing. The silence that followed was absolute. I could feel his shock, his disbelief. It was a physical force in the room. "Leaving?" he finally repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "Leaving the job? Aria, what did he do to you?" "He did nothing," I lied, each word a shard of glass in my throat. "He made me an offer, one I can't refuse." I finally forced myself to look at him, constructing a mask of cold indifference. He's going to take care of my brother, everything he needs, for the rest of his life. Damian stared at me, his stormy eyes searching my face, trying to find the truth, trying to find the woman who had kissed him with such fire in this very room. "And what does he want in return?" he asked, his voice a low growl. "Me," I said simply. The word hung between us, ugly and final. He laughed, a harsh, broken sound that held no humor. "No," he said, shaking his head. "No, I don't believe you." He took a step toward me, his hand reaching for mine. "Aria, this is a trick, a game. Don't let him manipulate you." "It's not a game," I snapped, snatching my hand back. "It's my choice." I put every ounce of my remaining strength into the lie, making it as cold and cruel as I could. "You offered me a choice, Damian, and this is it. I choose him. I choose my brother's life over this." I waved a hand vaguely, encompassing the office, him, the invisible bond between us. This was a mistake. The contract, the kiss, all of it. The hurt that flashed in his eyes was so profound, so devastating, it almost brought me to my knees. It was a raw, open wound, and I had just poured salt in it. In a blink, the hurt was gone, replaced by a terrifying glacial fury. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. The man disappeared, and only the alpha remained. "I see," he said, his voice a blade of ice. "You've made your decision." "I have." "Then get out," he snarled, turning his back on me to face the window, his entire body rigid with a control that was barely holding him together. "Get out of my office. Get out of my building. And don't ever let me see your face again." His words were a dismissal, an exile. They were the sound of my own heart shattering. I wanted to scream, to tell him the truth, to beg him to understand. But I couldn't. Leo's life was on the line. So I turned, and I walked away. Each step was an agony, tearing the bond between us thread by painful thread. I didn't look back. I couldn't bear to see the ruin I had left behind. I had made my choice. I had saved my brother. And in doing so, I had just destroyed the only two men I had ever truly loved. Chapter 17. The Challenge. The Pack Council Chamber was an ancient stone amphitheater hidden deep beneath the city, a place of grim tradition and brutal judgment. Damian stood in the center, alone. The rejection from Aria had hollowed him out, leaving behind a cold, dangerous emptiness. He was an alpha on the brink, his control a threadbare cloak around a raging blizzard of pain and fury. The council members, old gray wolves in expensive suits, watched him from their tiered seats, their faces like stone masks. They could smell his weakness, his heartbreak. And so could Kale. He stood on the opposite side of the chamber, looking utterly triumphant. His amber eyes gleamed with malice. "You see, esteemed council," Kyle began, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "I told you he was unstable. He forms a forbidden manipulative bond with a human girl, putting our entire pack at risk. And for what? For her to publicly reject him, to choose me instead." He let the words hang in the air, a public testament to Damian's failure. He cannot control his territory. He cannot even control his own chosen mate. He is not fit to be alpha. Damian remained silent, his face a mask of ice, but his hands were clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. An old wolf, the head of the council named Marcus, rose to his feet. "These are grave accusations, Kale, but the woman's rejection of Alpha Blackthorn does indeed cast a shadow on his authority." "A shadow I am prepared to remove," Kale said, his voice ringing with false sincerity. He took a step forward, a predatory smile playing on his lips. "I will not stand by and watch my brother's weakness destroy this pack. Therefore, I invoke the old law, the right of challenge." A collective gasp went through the chamber. The right of challenge. Trial by combat. It was a brutal, bloody tradition that hadn't been used in over a century. A fight to the death for absolute power. Marcus's eyes widened. "The right is absolute, Kale. The winner takes all. The loser forfeits everything." "I am aware," Kale said, his gaze fixed on Damian. A direct, final challenge. "I challenge my brother, Damian Blackthorn, for the title of Alpha of this pack." Damian's head snapped up, his stormy eyes blazing with a sudden, murderous fire. The pain was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated rage. This was a language he understood. Violence. "I accept." Damian's voice was a low growl that vibrated through the stone floor. Kale's smile widened. "Excellent. The throne. And all that comes with it." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the council members before landing back on Damian. "As is tradition, the winner claims the pack, the territory, and all assets of the loser." He let the words sink in, then delivered his final devastating blow. "Including any and all active bonds. I claim the right to the bond with the human girl, Aria Vale." The chamber erupted in murmurs. This wasn't just a challenge for power anymore, it was a challenge for her. To claim her bond was to claim her soul. She would be the victor's prize, her will, her choice, rendered utterly meaningless. She was no longer a person. She was property. Marcus looked at Damian, whose face had become a mask of horror. He had just cast her out, and now his greatest enemy was about to claim her as a spoil of war. "The law is clear," Marcus declared, his voice heavy with finality. "The right of challenge is invoked. The combat will take place at moonrise in 3 days' time. The prize, the throne, and the woman." Chapter 18. The Cage and the Beast. I didn't even make it back to my apartment. As I stepped out of the taxi, my body numb, my heart a dead weight in my chest, they appeared from the shadows. 2 hulking figures, their faces grim. They didn't say a word. They just grabbed me. Rough hands clamped down on my arms, lifting me off my feet like I was nothing. I didn't have the strength to fight, or even to scream. My throat was raw from unspoken grief. I was property now. The prize. And the prize had to be secured. They threw me into the back of a black van. The world was a blur of streetlights and darkness, and then nothing. They dragged me from the van and into a cold, damp space that smelled of earth and stone. I heard a heavy metal door clang shut, the sound of a bolt sliding home echoing in the oppressive silence. And then I was alone. In the dark. It was a cage. Or a cell. I couldn't see the walls, but I could feel them closing in. The finality of it all crashed down on me. I had sacrificed everything. My love. My freedom. My very soul. I had pushed Damian away, letting him believe I'd betrayed him, all to save Leo. And what had it gotten me? A cage. My choice had meant nothing. I was still just a pawn, a thing to be won or lost in a battle between monsters. The betrayal, the sacrifice, the helplessness. It was too much. The carefully constructed walls I had built around my heart, the control I had fought so hard to maintain, it all shattered. A deep, guttural sob ripped from my chest, a sound of pure, animalistic agony. And with it, something broke deep inside my soul. A crack. A tremor. The ancient magic my mother had used to bind my wolf, weakened by the constant pull of Damian's bond, strained by my own emerging powers, finally gave way under the crushing weight of my despair. It was not a gentle awakening. It was a violent, explosive birth. A fire ignited in my blood, searing through my veins. My bones felt like they were on fire, shifting, breaking, reforming. Pain, blinding, and absolute, tore through me. I screamed, but the sound that came out wasn't human. It was a raw, guttural roar, filled with a lifetime of repressed rage and instinct. My senses exploded. The darkness was no longer absolute. I could see the faint outlines of the stone walls, the glint of moisture on the floor. I could smell the fear scent of the guards outside the door, the distant, tantalizing aroma of the night air. The city's heartbeat was a drum against my new, hypersensitive ears. The human girl named Aria Vale, the one who cried and feared and sacrificed, was gone, burned away in the crucible of her own pain. In her place was something else, something ancient, something powerful, and something utterly, completely feral. My thoughts were no longer words. They were images, instincts, cage, trap, enemy. A snarl ripped through my chest, a low, rumbling promise of violence. My vision sharpened, the world shifting into a spectrum of heat and movement. The last vestiges of my human consciousness flickered and died, swallowed by a tidal wave of pure, untamed instinct. All that was left was the beast, a cornered animal, brimming with a power it didn't understand, driven by a single, all-consuming thought. Hunt. Chapter 19. The Choice Rage. Hunger. The sharp, coppery tang of fear from the men outside the stone walls. My world was a symphony of scent and sound, of instinct and impulse. The bars of the cage weren't metal. They were the lingering phantom memory of a girl who cried. That girl was gone. Now there was only the hunt, the need to break free, to rend and tear. My claws, now real and sharp as daggers, scraped against the stone floor, a hungry, rhythmic sound in the darkness. I was power. I was fury. I was a tempest trapped in a bottle. Then, a new scent cut through the chaos. It sliced through my feral haze like a lightning bolt in a midnight sky. Pine, rain, the ozone of a coming storm. It was the scent of my dreams, the scent of the man who was both my captor and something else. Something my soul recognized even when my mind was gone. Mate. The word was not a thought, but a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through my new, powerful body. A thunderous crash echoed from outside, followed by the choked-off cries of the guards. The heavy, bolted door to my cell didn't open. It exploded inward, ripped from its hinges and thrown across the room by a force of pure alpha rage. Damian stood in the ruined doorway, a silhouette against the dim light of the corridor. He was no longer the man in the suit. His eyes were blazing with a silver lupine light. His power rolled off him in waves, a physical presence that should have challenged me, that should have sent my own feral instincts into a frenzy of dominance and aggression. But it didn't. He looked at me, at the creature I had become, crouched in the corner, a low growl rumbling in my chest, and his face wasn't filled with horror or fear. It was filled with a devastating, breathtaking reverence. He didn't see a monster. He saw me. "Aria," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble that soothed the storm inside me where a command would have enraged it. He took a slow step into the cell. I snarled, a warning. He stopped. He didn't try to dominate me. He didn't raise his voice. He did something I could never have expected. He slowly, deliberately, went down on one knee. He lowered his head, exposing his neck in the ultimate act of shifter submission. An alpha, kneeling, not to a rival, but to me. He made himself utterly, completely vulnerable. "I won't command you," he said, his voice thick with an emotion that cut deeper than any claw. "I won't force you. The bond, the contract, none of it matters if you aren't you." He lifted his head, and his blazing silver wolf eyes met mine. They were filled with an aching, desperate love. "They want to make you a prize. I won't let them, but I won't make you a prisoner either." He stood, backing away toward the broken doorway, leaving my path to freedom completely open. "Choose me, Aria," he pleaded, his voice cracking, "or walk away. Be free, run and never look back, but whatever you do, choose." His words, his vulnerability, his unwavering respect for my choice even now when I was more beast than woman. They were a key. They slid into the lock of my feral mind and turned. The rage receded, the primal instincts quieted, and deep within the heart of the beast, the soul of Aria Vale, now forged in fire and armed with claws, began to stir. I looked at the man who was willing to lose everything for my freedom, and for the first time, I felt the bond not as a chain, but as an anchor. With a shuddering breath that was half growl, half sob, I took a single, shaky step toward him. I chose. Chapter 20. The plan. The moment I chose him, the world shifted. The feral storm inside me didn't vanish, but it calmed, the raging waves receding to a deep, powerful tide under my control. My bones ached as my body shifted back, not to the weak human form I once knew, but to something new. I was still me, but stronger. My senses were still heightened, the world a vivid tapestry of scent and sound. The power, the wolf, the hybrid. It was no longer a monster tearing me apart from the inside. It was just me. Damian watched the transformation, his expression filled with wonder. He didn't rush me. He just waited, his presence a solid, unwavering certainty. When I could finally stand, steady on my own 2 feet, I looked at my hands. My nails were normal, but I knew with a deep cellular certainty that I could turn them into claws in a heartbeat. The golden glow in my eyes had faded to a warm, simmering ember. "Aria?" he whispered, his voice full of hope. "I'm here," I said. My own voice sounded different, deeper, more resonant, more real than it had ever been. "I'm me." A wave of relief so profound it was almost painful washed over his face. He closed the distance between us in a single stride and wrapped his arms around me, pulling me against his chest. It wasn't a kiss. It was something more. A desperate, grounding embrace. I buried my face in his neck, inhaling the scent of pine and storm, the scent of my mate. I held on to him just as tightly, feeling the solid, steady beat of his heart against mine. We had found each other in the wreckage. Kale did this, I said against his skin. Leo. The word was a pang of grief, but the all-consuming despair was gone, replaced by a cold, hard anger. I know, Damian murmured into my hair. We'll fix it. I'll fix it. But first, we have to survive tonight. He pulled back, his hands framing my face, his eyes searching mine. The trial. It's at moonrise. I looked at the sliver of moon visible through a high, barred window. It was already climbing the sky. We didn't have time. He challenged you for the throne and for me, I said, the words tasting like poison. They want to watch you fight for me like I'm a piece of property. I'll fight, he said, his voice a low growl. I'll tear him apart. No, I said, a new fierce certainty hardening my voice. I pulled away from him, my mind clear and sharp, my new hybrid instincts and my human intellect working in perfect, deadly harmony. No, you won't fight for me. I looked him straight in the eye, my own glowing with a faint golden light. You'll fight with me. He stared at me, his eyes widening in shock. Aria, that's impossible. The prize is not allowed to fight. Then we break the law, I said, a feral smile touching my lips for the first time. The plan was simple, it was desperate, it was insane, and it was the only way. I am not a prize to be won. I am not a bond to be claimed. I am a participant in this war. Kale wants a show? We'll give him one. He challenged an alpha. He didn't realize he was challenging a hybrid, too. Damian looked at me, at the newfound power radiating from me, at the unshakable resolve in my eyes. The shock on his face melted away, replaced by a slow, dangerous smile of his own. He was looking at his equal, his partner, his Luna. Together, he agreed, his voice a vow. And in that moment, we weren't just two souls bound by fate. We were a single unified weapon aimed directly at the heart of our enemies. Chapter 21. The race to the climax. We moved through the shadows like ghosts. Damian knew the city's hidden ways, the forgotten service tunnels and dark alleyways that form the secret circulatory system beneath the glittering facade of his empire. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay, but to my heightened senses, it was a roadmap. I could smell the path ahead, the subtle shifts in air currents, the faint, acrid scent of Kale's pack members patrolling the streets above. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. We moved in a synchronized, unspoken rhythm, a predator and his mate on the hunt. His powerful, deliberate strides were matched by my own swift, silent steps. A new, powerful grace had settled into my limbs. I felt faster, stronger, more alive than I had ever been. We were a team, our strengths complementing each other perfectly. As we neared the hidden entrance to the amphitheater, two figures dropped down from a fire escape in front of us, blocking the narrow alley. Kyle's men. They were big, brutish wolves, their faces twisted into sneers. The prize is supposed to stay in its cage, one of them snarled. Before Damian could even move, I acted. Instinct and training I never knew I had took over. I exploded forward, a blur of motion. I didn't use claws or fangs. I used the element of surprise. I slammed my palm into the first guard's chest, using my newfound hybrid strength to send him staggering back into a pile of trash cans. The second guard lunged for me. Damian intercepted him, a low, warning growl ripping from his chest. The two alphas crashed into each other, a whirlwind of muscle and fury. But I wasn't going to just stand by. I spun, my leg sweeping out and knocking the first guard's feet out from under him as he tried to stand. He went down with a hard grunt. Damian dispatched his opponent with a brutal, efficient series of blows, leaving the man groaning on the ground. He turned to me, his silver eyes wide with a mixture of shock and pride as I stood over the second unconscious guard. "You're a natural," he said, a hint of awe in his voice. "I had a good teacher," I replied, my gaze flickering to him. Desperation. We shared a look, a moment of profound understanding and connection in the midst of the chaos. We were stronger together. The realization settled between us, a silent, unbreakable vow. We continued on, the urgency pressing down on us. We could hear the low murmur of the crowd from the amphitheater now, the sound echoing through the stone tunnels. We were close. But were we too late? We burst through a final, heavy door and into the back corridors of the ancient chamber. The air was thick with the scent of power, of anticipation, of bloodlust. We could hear the voice of Marcus, the council head, echoing from the main chamber. And with no challenger present, Alpha Damian Blackthorn forfeits the right. By the old law, the title, the territory, and the bond with the woman Aria Vale now passed to. "Not so fast!" My voice, amplified by the chamber's acoustics, cracked through the hall like a whip. Every head turned as Damian and I stepped out of the shadows and into the torchlight of the arena floor. A collective gasp rippled through the pack. We stood side by side, his eyes blazing silver, my own glowing gold. We were not a broken alpha and his lost prize. We were a united front, ready for war. Kale, who had been standing with his arms raised in premature victory, slowly lowered them, his charming smile replaced by a look of pure, venomous hatred. The trial wasn't over. It had just begun. Chapter 22. The Trial. The silence in the amphitheater was a held breath. Kale laughed, a low, ugly sound that echoed off the ancient stones. "Fighting with you? The prize doesn't get a say in its own battle." He lunged, not at me, but at Damian, his movements a blur of ruthless speed. The fight for the throne had begun. It was a battle of two alphas, a brutal dance of power and hate. Damian was a storm of raw, focused strength, his blows landing with the force of a battering ram. Kale was a viper, quicker, his style filled with cruel, flashy moves designed to wound and humiliate. He was younger, and his rage made him reckless and deadly. He dodged one of Damian's powerful lunges and sliced his claws across my mate's ribs. Damian roared, a sound of pure pain and fury, and staggered back. That was the moment. My moment. Kyle saw Damian falter and moved in for the kill, his lips peeled back in a triumphant snarl. He wouldn't get the chance. I moved. I didn't run. I flowed. My hybrid nature wasn't just about strength. It was about a grace and speed that pure-blooded wolves didn't possess. I was a whip-crack of motion, a shadow that moved between heartbeats. I slammed into Kale from the side, my shoulder connecting with his ribs with a sickening crunch. He flew sideways, shock and agony warring on his face. He'd never even seen me coming. He scrambled to his feet, his amber eyes blazing with disbelief and hatred. "You! Hybrid bitch!" he snarled. "This is between you and me," Damian growled, moving to stand in front of me, shielding me despite his injury. I put a hand on his arm, stopping him. "No," I said, my voice ringing with a power that made the entire chamber fall silent. "It's between him and us." We moved together. It wasn't a planned attack. It was pure instinct, a symphony of shared intent. Damian was the thunder, his raw power forcing Kale onto the defensive, every blow a hammer strike. I was the lightning. I moved around them, a blur of motion, my attacks fast and precise. I was a distraction, a phantom menace that Kale couldn't track. I would land a sharp kick to the back of his knee, forcing him to stumble into one of Damian's powerful punches. When he turned to slash at me, Damian would be there, catching his arm. We were a perfect, deadly unit. The brute strength of the alpha and the surgical, impossible speed of the hybrid. Kale was powerful, but he was alone. He was fighting a single two-headed beast that anticipated his every move. He grew desperate, his attacks becoming sloppy. He lunged for me, his claws extended, murder in his eyes. But Damian was there. He caught Cale's arm, his own claws sinking deep. And I was there too. I didn't use claws. I drove my fist, hardened with a strength I never knew I possessed, into Cale's jaw. The crack echoed through the chamber. Cale's eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed to the stone floor, a broken, unconscious heap. Silence. The fight was over. We had won. Damian and I stood over our defeated enemy, breathing heavily, our bodies bruised and bleeding, but our gazes locked. We stood not as alpha and mate, but as partners, as equals, as victors. Chapter 23. The Judgment. Damian stood tall, his hand finding mine in the center of the silent arena. Our victory was absolute, but as I looked at the faces of the council members, I saw no celebration. I saw only grim, stony judgment. Marcus, the council head, rose slowly to his feet, his ancient eyes fixed on us. "The right of challenge is concluded," he declared, his voice booming through the chamber. "Cale Blackthorn is defeated. Damian Blackthorn remains alpha." A few scattered cheers broke out from the crowd, but Marcus raised a hand, silencing them immediately. "However," his voice sharpened, "a grave law has been broken here tonight. The sacred rite was defiled. Alpha Blackthorn fought not alone, but with this woman, an outsider, a hybrid of unknown lineage." His gaze fell on me, filled with disdain. "Our law is clear. To interfere in a rite is a capital offense. To bring a non-pack entity onto the floor of combat is an act of treason against our traditions." "She is my mate," Damian growled, his protective stance unwavering. "She is your prize, according to the right you accepted," Marcus shot back. "And for this transgression, for putting your bond before the law, this council has no choice. We declare your victory void. You are stripped of your title. Damian Blackthorn, you are hereby exiled." A wave of shock and outrage rippled through the pack. Exiled. After everything, we had still lost. But I wasn't the same girl who had walked into this world weeks ago. I wasn't a prize. I wasn't a victim. And I would not be exiled. I let go of Damian's hand and stepped forward, my gaze sweeping across the council. "What law?" I asked, my voice ringing with a power that commanded their attention. "A law that makes me a prize? A law that calls me an outsider when my own blood runs deeper in this world than you can imagine?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out the crumpled, hated document that had started it all. The contract. "You speak of bonds and laws. This is the only law that ever bound me to him." And in front of the entire pack, I ripped the contract in two. A collective gasp echoed in the chamber. "No law binds me," I declared, letting the pieces of paper flutter to the stone floor. "No contract owns me. No alpha claims me against my will." I turned and looked at Damian, my heart in my eyes. I choose him, and he chooses me. I faced the council again, my body starting to hum with a power I could no longer contain. A soft, golden light began to emanate from my skin. "You want to follow your old broken laws? Fine. But the pack follows its heart. And a pack needs a Luna." I let my power flare, the golden light washing over the amphitheater. It was not a challenge. It was a declaration. I was here. I was hybrid. I was mate. And I was their Luna, whether their laws accepted me or not. And then, something incredible happened. A young wolf in the front row, his eyes wide with awe, slowly went down on one knee, then another and another. Across the chamber, pack members began to kneel. Not to Damian, not to the council. They knelt to me. They were not bowing to a law. They were bowing to a leader. The council stood frozen, their authority crumbling to dust in the face of the pack's undeniable choice. Chapter 24. The Claiming. We stood on the balcony of his penthouse office, the city glittering below us like a carpet of fallen stars. The chaos of the trial felt a world away. The pack had chosen. The council, their power broken, had been forced to stand down. We had won. Not just the fight, but the war for our future. The air was cool and crisp, a gentle breeze washing over us. Damian stood behind me, his arms wrapped around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. We didn't speak for a long time. We just breathed. We breathed in the victory, the peace, the quiet certainty of what we had become. "I never thought this was possible," I whispered, looking out at the endless city lights. "To feel free." "You were never my prisoner, Aria," he murmured against my hair, his voice a low, reverent rumble. "You were the one who freed me." He was right. He had been trapped in his own cage of control and grief, and I had been the key, just as he had been mine. He turned me around to face him. The moonlight softened the hard lines of his face, and his stormy eyes were filled with an emotion so deep, so profound, it stole my breath. It was a look of pure, unconditional love. He had seen me at my most broken, my most feral, and my most powerful, and his love had never wavered. "You chose me," he said, his voice thick with wonder. "I'll always choose you," I replied, my voice just as soft. He leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't the desperate, hungry kiss of the storm, or the possessive kiss in his chair. This was a kiss of promises kept, of battles won. It was slow and tender, and filled with a universe of unspoken vows. When he pulled away, his eyes were blazing with a soft, silver light. It was time. "Aria Vale," he whispered, his voice shaking with the weight of the moment. "My mate, my partner, my Luna." He gently tilted my head to the side, exposing the curve of my neck. I felt no fear, only a deep, soul-shaking sense of rightness. This wasn't an act of possession. It wasn't a claim of ownership. It was the final, physical seal of a choice we had both freely made. He lowered his head, his lips brushing against my skin, sending a shiver of pure bliss through my entire body. Then, I felt the sharp pressure of his fangs. It wasn't a savage bite, but a slow, deliberate claiming. A spark of pure energy ignited at the touch, a white-hot starburst that exploded through my veins, binding us together on a level beyond magic, beyond law, beyond life itself. I felt his soul merge with mine, his strength becoming my strength, my heart beating in time with his. The bond, once a chain, was now a glorious, unbreakable anchor. When he pulled away, 2 small marks remained on my neck, a permanent testament to our vow. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. We were one. He was mine, and I was his. Not by contract, not by fate, but by choice. We stood together in the moonlight, looking out at the city that was now ours to protect. Our journey had started in desperation and fear, but it had led us here, to a new beginning, forged in fire and rebellion, and sealed with a love that would redefine their world forever.